All I had was silence, and with the absence of your word, I took it as an answer. By Annie Dot. Chapter 3. Second Installment. Sakura didn't even look at him for more than half of their journey. They were headed to the same towns in the same order, so what should have been 2 different missions turned very fast into a single one, and Sakura wasn't happy about it. Sasuke wasn't blaming her. He wasn't too fond of himself either at the moment. Still, it made traveling quite uncomfortable. They were in the company of almost 20 Medicnins, maybe a third of what Konoha had to offer. If anyone had asked him, he would have said he felt that this whole expedition was beyond rush, so soon after the war. But from the way Sakura walked, confident, desperate, he figured she had wanted to get away as much as he did. She reminded him of himself when he had left to join Orochimaru. He was taking the silence in stride. He was like an invisible sentinel, following the group of Medicnins, all of which knew and respected each other, none of which knew or respected him. Sakura was clearly the leader, and everyone was quick in following in her footsteps and giving him the cold shoulder. It was fine. It wasn't like he had wanted to talk to them either. But he had maybe thought that he and Sakura had salvaged at least a bit of their old relationship while he was lying on that rock, waiting for her to stop him from bleeding out. He had apologized, but he knew from first-hand experience it usually wasn't enough. He just couldn't figure out if he had done something else he hadn't realized ever since being back in Konoha, or it was just old resentment resurfacing now that they were alone without their third teammate as a buffer. So yes, Sasuke was a bit disappointed that he had been under false impressions all those weeks in T&I. He wanted to fix it. He didn't want to go back to Konoha and pass by Sakura in the streets without talking. He hadn't been lying when he said to Naruto that the city had changed. He had expected despicable treatment in the dungeons, but he hadn't gotten it. Ibiki had been ruthless but not cruel. He had heard of the changes the new Hokage was making, had heard of Naruto helping him, guiding Konoha into a new age. He thought he finally understood what Naruto had been saying all those years, chasing Sasuke around the world. He thought he finally understood why, and was finally ready to let himself reciprocate. He knew now that he should stay. For Naruto, he would stay. But first, he had to sort out his mind. He had to come to terms with what had happened to Itachi, with the sacrifices his brother had made, and the reasons he had made them for. He needed to understand that most of his life had been wasted on something that was little more than unadulterated manipulation. He wasted his life, and somewhere in between he also wasted Naruto's. And he thought as he looked at Sakura's pink head running in front of him, maybe Sakura's too. Another apology couldn't hurt, he figured. Maybe he'll get it right this time. They barely stopped while crossing fire. There was no time to talk, no time alone. Sasuke complied without complaining, but he secretly wished to reach the sea sooner, before he lost his nerve. Then Sakura took the decision to cross the sea also and spend the night on the first island from water. She said there was a medic she wanted to meet, even if he didn't appear in the schedule she had received from the Hokage. Their name and purpose had traveled faster than them because when they got there, a crowd had already gathered. Sasuke kept his eyes straight ahead and hoped that soon his hair would be long enough to cover the Rinnegan. Their welcome was almost icy. Sasuke kept the back of the group, trying not to capture the attention of anyone. Somehow he still did. Sakura kept throwing him dirty looks whenever the Medicnin she was talking to drifted off to stare at him. It kept happening. Sasuke sneaking off to talk to blacksmiths and to teachers and to everyone he encountered, writing his reports all while being followed by a mob. The people he was talking to stared at him, sometimes in fear, other times in awe. He kept being a bother for Sakura's mission, and by the third island, the rest of his companions started hating him too, if they hadn't already. On the fourth one, they got hotel rooms. They were for 2 persons, and somehow Sasuke ended up sharing with Sakura. He thought maybe she was the only one not afraid of him. He found her mumbling under her breath while sorting through her supply bag in the room. He knew she must have heard him, but he still cleared his throat to announce his presence. She froze, then straightened her back. They stood in silence for a while before Sasuke figured it was really now or never. "Sakura," he hesitated, watching her shoulders stiffen. "I would like to talk if you're available." When she turned, her eyes were stony. "So talk." He took a deep breath. "I was under the impression we had put aside our differences. If I was mistaken, I would like to use this moment to apologize once more for the harm." She scoffed and threw her hands up. Sasuke fell silent. That had been difficult even without the interruption, but now he really didn't think he'd be able to start talking again. Every interaction he had since the war had been based on memory. He would think, what would Nissan say? How would Nissan say it? How would Nissan hold his body? How would he react to this? He didn't have a template for this conversation. Sakura paced the room a couple of times before sighing and dropping on the bed as if someone had cut her strings. She put her head in her hands and sighed once more. Sasuke was completely lost. He had half a thought to just flee, but he was trying to be better, do better, to stop running. For Nissan. Unfortunately, Sakura talked first. We had settled our differences, but Sasuke... Her voice seemed almost desperate, and he was suddenly afraid he had walked into a confession he had earlier been convinced wouldn't happen. She looked at him and her eyes were disappointed. She pointed towards the other bed. "Sit down." He sat. "I gave up on you, Sasuke, a long time ago. Repeatedly." Sasuke knew that. He had never asked her to wait or endure. He had never asked anyone for that. The fact that one person still did baffled him. He only nodded, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "He didn't," Sakura continued, and that. He looked down at the floor, hoping she couldn't read him that well. "Why are you here, Sasuke?" "What do you mean? I have a mission." "No, I meant here, in water, when you should be in Konoha, doing whatever silly things made you get this close to one another." Sakura was yelling now, and rage was once again coloring her features. "You're here too," he countered, although it sounded weak even to his ears. She scoffed. "Do I have a record of abandoning the village? I didn't think so either." "Why are you running again? I thought there were no reasons to run anymore." He looked up at that, aghast. "I'm not running," he denied. "Yes, you are. You're here I'm not running." Sakura stopped talking. He was breathing hard, chest heaving. He could feel the phantom pain in his left arm, and he desperately wished for that tattoo to have still been there. "I took this mission," he breathed, "to clear my head. It's the only one I'm planning on taking. I'm not running." She looked at him for a second, then she almost smiled. "Good. I don't think he could take it one more time." She got up, oblivious of the way Sasuke's heart was beating in his throat. "Naruto's very strong, you know." She had turned her back on him once again, rummaging through her bag. "But there's only so much a person can take, and you've always been his soft spot." "What do you mean?" he whispered. "I mean, you could build him up, or you could break him down." He didn't respond, but he knew that the moment he got back, he'll do whatever he has to do. He's done running. It never did him any good. It never did Nissan any good. And he needed to be better. He had made a promise. The weeks before the new year found them in Kiri, buried up to their neck in scrolls, going over and over them, trying to learn new techniques. They had met with the Mizukage, and while she was visibly resisting murdering Sasuke, she seemed to really like Sakura. He was glad, weirdly. Him and Sakura, although they haven't been talking a whole lot, were spending more and more time together, writing their reports next to one another, sometimes asking for a piece of advice. The news got to them when they were in the library. The Mizukage had put them at their disposal, surrounded by documents regarding an ancient style of taijutsu that Kiri had been practicing for centuries. It was quite interesting. When Mizukage-sama walked in, both of them forgot about the scrolls. Her face was neutral, but she was clutching a piece of paper in her hand with such force it was a wonder it hadn't ripped. When she reached them, they both stood. She passed her icy eyes over Sasuke and looked Sakura straight in the eye. "I'm sorry to disturb your study, but Kakashi-sama wrote to you." She handed the letter to Sakura. It had been opened. "I'm also sorry for opening it, but it's mandatory protocol that all mail from and for Kages go through my hands." She looked remorseful, but Sasuke focused on Sakura's face as she read the letter, noticing how she became paler and paler. "I can prepare for you and Uchiha-san's departure immediately. Your colleague can finish your research." "Thank you," whispered Sakura, clutching the paper to her chest. Sasuke saw her sway and grabbed her arm to stabilize her. The Mizukage nodded, then left swiftly. Sasuke turned to Sakura. What happened? Her eyes were in tears, and Sasuke somehow figured it out before she spoke, stomach dropping to his knees, heart jumping to his throat. "It's Naruto." "What happened to him?" "Sensei said they think he had a mental breakdown." They didn't stop. They didn't talk. They wouldn't know what to say. Sasuke was waiting to wake up. He had nightmares like this before. He would push Naruto just like he always did, and then something horrible would happen to him, and Sasuke wouldn't make it in time to save him. He was going to wake up any minute now on his futon in Kiri. Any minute now. They pushed each other harder and harder. Sasuke could hear Sakura sniffling every now and then, but he didn't have the heart to comfort her in any way. He was hanging on by a thread himself. He was going to wake up any minute now. A journey that should have taken 4 days only took 2. By the time the gates of Konoha were visible, they didn't even feel the exhaustion anymore. They headed straight for the hospital. Sakura walked right up to the nurse station where a very young girl was standing up. "Where is Tsunade-sama?" questioned Sakura, voice harsh. They rushed towards the corridor the girl had pointed at. Shikamaru was the first Sasuke laid eyes on. He was leaning against another nurse's station talking to a doctor. He looked exhausted. His legs stopped. He couldn't. Sakura walked right up to him when Shikamaru spotted her. He gave a sigh of relief, walking towards her. "Hey, where is he?" "In that room," he said, pointing behind himself. Sakura started walking, but Shikamaru caught her arm. "Shika, let me go," she warned. "He's unresponsive. I'll judge for myself." "Sakura, listen to me," he yelled right back. He immediately deflated. "It's like he is not there, Sakura. It's like someone stole him and placed some sort of doll in his body. He looks straight through you." He was gesturing with his hands, movements frenzied. Sasuke didn't wait any longer. He didn't want to hear another word. He was across the room and opening the door before Shikamaru could finish his sentence. The room was dark, curtains pulled. He could see the bed and a human form beneath the blanket curled into itself. It couldn't be. His knees were shaking. He walked around the bed, catching a glimpse of blonde hair coming out of the blankets. Naruto was awake, or at least his eyes were opened. He was staring straight at the window. "Naruto?" His voice was shaking. Why was his voice shaking? He won't answer. Shikamaru was standing right outside the open door. He's been like this for over a week. They're feeding him through the tube. He won't eat, won't move, won't respond. It's like he doesn't even know we're here. We tried everything. Panic was crawling across Sasuke's skin. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this scared. Was it the night his parents died? Did he? His voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. Did he respond to anything at all? Just when I found him, I asked him what happened, and he told me it was everywhere. What was everywhere? I have no fucking clue, Sasuke. In the low light of the room, Shikamaru looked even more tired as he rubbed his hand across his face. Sasuke turned back to Naruto, ignoring the pain inside his body, ignoring the fact that he had an audience. He crouched next to him, trying to catch his eye. Shikamaru was right. Sasuke counted his breaths, trying to keep it together. He raised a shaky hand and put it over where Naruto's own lied, clutching the pillow. There was still no response. Sasuke swallowed the knot from his throat. You're okay. he whispered, ignoring the curious glance from Shikamaru and the way his own voice was breaking on every word. "You'll be okay. I'm not leaving you. I'm not going anywhere." The cafeteria of the hospital was absolutely huge, but still, Sasuke felt as if the walls were closing in on him. He stayed motionless, seated on one of the chairs against the wall, looking at his hands. The one real and the one fake. He knew people were talking around him. He could vaguely hear Sakura yell something at someone, but all it felt very unimportant right then to him. A mental breakdown, Kakashi had named it in the letter. Naruto's chart was saying it differently, not as nicely. A psychotic break. Multiple possible causes. Post-traumatic stress disorder from the war, a sense of unfulfillment now that things were settling down, a feeling of uselessness, normal things for a shinobi coming back from war to experience. Kakashi's father went through it. Thinking about it made Sasuke's blood run cold. Some of the specialist medic nin said that sometimes there's no reason at all, it just happens. He'll bounce back eventually. Was this what Sasuke was supposed to be doing? Sitting by his bedside day in and day out, waiting to be recognized, waiting for Naruto to want to live again? Sasuke. His head popped up, turning to Kakashi. "Did you hear what we said?" Sakura was gone, he noticed. When had she left? Sasuke. "I'm sorry," he said, turning his attention back to Kakashi. "You should get some rest," said the older man. I'm fine." It was an automatic response, and no one in the room was fooled. He wanted to get back up and go see Naruto. Push him around a bit maybe, call him an idiot if that didn't work. Confess. The next few days passed in a blur. He spent his days in the hospital standing stoically next to Naruto's bedside for as long as he could. Then, when he couldn't take it anymore, he took refuge on the roof, breathing harshly, trying to hold it together. Sakura joined him whenever she could. The first time, she said what the doctors are doing isn't good. It isn't right. Sasuke yelled at her that at least they were doing something. She left crying. The next time, she brought a decaying piece of paper she had stolen from the Mizukage's library. The basis for her accusations, she had called it. Sasuke was shaking as he looked at it. He threw it back at her. Next time, she just sat down next to him and held his hand. Or maybe he held hers. Naruto wasn't getting better. He showed up at her doorstep on the evening of day number 3. "Tell me what you meant when you said that what the doctors were doing isn't good," he said when she opened the door. Neither slept that night, not that they had the previous ones. "Slow down," Kakashi muttered. Eyes closed, half of his face hidden in his hands. "It won't just go away, sensei," repeated Sakura, showing Kakashi her research. "People have struggled with this before, and it doesn't just go away. They need help, therapy, medication, and a support system, and all that. The doctors are just keeping him alive, sensei. They aren't making him better. Let me help." Kakashi looked at Sasuke. "What do you think?" "That she's right." Sakura almost smiled at that. They imported the drug because Konoha didn't have anything even remotely similar. Sasuke stood in his chair, holding a hand that wasn't holding back as Sakura administered the first dose. They had expected immediate results. They hovered around the hospital room for hours, hoping for improvements. They were wrong. Sakura didn't give up, so Sasuke didn't either. He let Sakura keep watch the next day as he went to Naruto's apartment. The door was open. He kept his jaw clenched while walking through the debris. There were so many pieces of paper. He picked one up, and when he saw what was on it, he dropped it again. It was Itachi, a drawing of Itachi wearing a blindfold with outstretched arms and ravens on those arms, one higher on his shoulder and one near his wrist. There had been writing beneath the drawing, but it had been erased. He picked up another piece of paper, a draft with crossings and rewritten lines of something that sounded awfully similar to an exoneration. It had his brother's name on it. He sorted through all of the papers carefully, tears in his eyes, but never spilled over. This is what he had been doing ever since Sasuke left. He had been looking for ways to clear his brother's name. He found the kill order with underlined and circled passages with almost incomprehensible notes in the margins. Had Naruto even been conscious of what he was doing? Had he even been lucid? Sasuke crumbled to the floor in the middle of Naruto's apartment and actually cried for the first time since finding out the truth about his brother. He cleaned the apartment before leaving. He put new sheets on the bed, bought groceries, washed the dishes, did the laundry, placed all of Naruto's work neatly in an empty cupboard. He took the drawing with him. When he got to the hospital, he stopped in his tracks in the doorway of Naruto's room. Sakura was nowhere to be found. Naruto was facing the door. He was asleep. Naruto moved again during the night, not as drastically, but still visible. Trying to keep watch for any other movement, Sasuke fell asleep. He woke up at dawn. Naruto had rolled towards the window again. Sasuke's eyes widened. He was awake. He was staring straight at Sasuke. He felt like he could cry. He moved slowly, as not to scare him. He put his hand close to Naruto's, but not touching. "Hey," he whispered. "Are you real?" Naruto whispered back. Sasuke felt his throat close. "Yes?" "You came back?" Naruto's voice sounded the worst kind of hopeful, so small and pitiful, something Sasuke had never heard from him before. "Fuck it," he thought. He took Naruto's hand and dragged his chair close enough to be able to lean his upper body on the bed from a single move. Naruto was looking at their entwined hands like he thought it was a dream. Sasuke dragged his hand through Naruto's matted hair. "I'm not leaving." They took it easy. Sasuke was always there no matter what. The nurse brought him another bed, but he refused. He wanted to sleep where he could feel Naruto close to him. Sakura dropped by, always dressed in scrubs, always with the excuse of checking Naruto's vitals. Kakashi was allowed because no one could tell the Hokage no, but he didn't abuse that permission. Shikamaru only came to visit once, a visit during which he had stared at Naruto for so long Sasuke was getting ready to tell him to leave. But then he bent over, ruffled Naruto's hair, which was an impossible feat, smiled, and then left. Every morning, Sasuke saw the moment Naruto went from thinking it was a dream to knowing everything was real. Day by day, he stopped being so surprised to always find Sasuke there. Sasuke buried his heartache somewhere deep inside himself and only smiled. They didn't talk almost at all. Naruto was still unwilling to do most things, like eat and get out of bed. He slept a lot. But when he was awake, he was always looking at Sasuke, and Sasuke took this as the biggest win. No other friends were allowed to visit, so they spent their days in almost complete silence, only with some interruptions from Sasuke about what he was reading that day. And Naruto, slowly but surely, got better. One day, he smiled when Sasuke hit his foot on the corner of the table. He felt like he could defeat another Kagyo right then the whole day. He wanted to hit his foot again, only to see Naruto smile again. Then he pushed himself up on his arms when the nurse came to change his IV and asked in a very hoarse voice for some solid food. Sasuke had to excuse himself to go smile at his own reflection in the mirror for 10 minutes. Next, he wanted a shower. Then he told Sasuke to change the TV program. The next day, he told him to bring him some more manga. They still didn't talk much, but Naruto smiled almost every day now, and he even had started walking. And for Sasuke, it was more than enough. After he got even better, and he started seeing his friends, he also started to get worse. He asked Sasuke one day, "Why do you stay here all day?" Sasuke simply turned towards him and asked, "Do you want me to leave?" Naruto didn't respond, but he was in a horrible mood the rest of the day. "There are side effects, Sasuke," Sakura had told him. "There will be good days and days that start out good but end badly. Recovery isn't linear." Naruto remained moody for close to a week. He was walking on his own, and even if he still hadn't left the hospital room, he dragged a chair next to the window, and he spent most of his day there. He was getting better, and it was easier and easier to see, but there were still marks, like how much weight he had lost, and his hair, which was now so long, you could probably tie it. Sasuke never commented, not on anything Naruto did or how he dressed or acted. Why are you like this? Naruto asked one day when it was much closer to spring than winter. Sasuke prepared himself before answering. Like what? Like that, exclaimed the blonde. You never say anything. I literally cannot do anything that would normally piss you off, and you still wouldn't say anything. Would you rather I did? Asked Sasuke calmly. It was apparently the wrong thing to say because tears erupted from Naruto's eyes. Sasuke panicked. Shit. He hadn't really seen Naruto cry before, but the situation was heading south very fast. Naruto placed a hand against his own chest, shaking under the weight of his sobs. Sasuke just acted. He climbed into the bed, grabbing Naruto's hands and dragging him forward until he collapsed against Sasuke's chest. Shaking into his shirt, Sasuke started breathing louder, trying to give him something to use to ground himself. He was rubbing Naruto's wrist with his fingers and was holding back his own tears, and coming above, all Sasuke wanted was for this to be over. Hadn't the poor kid suffered enough? Please, God, stop his pain. Eventually, Naruto calmed down. This, he whispered in Sasuke's shirt. What this? He asked, rubbing Naruto's neck. I wish you'd stop pitying me. His hands froze. I don't pity you? Then why are you still here? I'm all fine now. I won't go nuts again, I promise. Sasuke tutted, resettling his petting. You're not crazy. Sure. He grabbed Naruto's shoulders and pulled him up until their eyes met. You're not crazy, he said again, letting the words burn his throat, his lips, his eyes, until they were imprinted there forever. And I'm here, he continued, not because I pity you, but because when you hurt, I hurt, and all I want to do is take some of your burden so it will be easier. He let his hands slide from Naruto's neck to his cheek. I don't want you to decide to stay because of this, the blonde said, gesturing to the hospital room around them. I had decided to stay before I knew of this, Sasuke responded honestly. Naruto's lips tasted like tears in the medicine he took and blood from the wounds that wouldn't heal inside his mouth from the drugs. Sasuke ate it all up.